One relentless question rang out, over and over, pushing the room to the edge, until Karoline Leavitt snapped and turned the tables in a way no one saw coming. The crowd went silent, eyes wide, as the chaos unfolded in a packed Washington, D.C. briefing room. The cameras didn't miss a thing, and the drama was just beginning. What would you have done in her shoes? Toss your take in the comments below. This one's going to keep you hooked. That day, the place was alive with energy. Journalists filled every chair, itching to jot down the next big story. Cameras lined the back wall, their lenses zeroed in on the podium where Karoline stood tall. She was cool, collected, the kind of person who thrived under fire. She'd faced sharp questions in tough rooms plenty of times, but today carried a different weight. Something buzzed in the air, tense and restless, like a storm brewing. Karoline tapped the mic. "Good afternoon, folks," she said, voice clear and firm. "Let's dive in." Hands shot up fast. Reporters were hungry, their voices clashing as they fought to be heard. She picked a familiar face, a guy from a top news network. "What's the word on those tax cuts?" he asked. Karoline answered without a hitch, smooth and on point, like she'd rehearsed it in her sleep. It was textbook, the kind of response that kept things rolling. Then came a question about education changes. She tackled it just as easily, sticking to the plan, keeping control. This was her game. Stay steady, on the moment, sidestep the curveballs. She'd mastered it long ago. But then a voice cut through the noise, loud and biting. "Ms. Leavitt, how about the real problem here?" It hit like a spark in dry grass. Head swiveled. There she was, the challenger, as some might call her. She sat up front, leaning in, a smirk dancing on her face. Her pen tapped her notebook like she was winding up for a fight. Karoline didn't flinch. "Go on," she said, steady as a rock. The challenger jumped right in. "Are these policies built to keep some groups down? The data's pretty clear." Karoline lifted a hand, stopping her cold. "I've covered that already. We're here for all Americans, period. Got something on today's agenda?" "I'm listening." A few murmurs spread through the room. The challenger's smirk stayed put. "You didn't really answer, though," she fired back. "Yes or no?" Karoline kept her cool. "I answered. Let's move forward." She nodded to another reporter, but the challenger wasn't letting go. "Why are you sidestepping this?" she said, her voice slicing through again. Eyes darted around, some curious, some irritated. The air got tighter, the vibe shifting quick. This wasn't a regular back and forth anymore. It was a face-off. Karoline breathed slow. "I'm not sidestepping. I'm staying focused. Next up." But the challenger leaned into her mic. "So, that's a pass then?" The quiet that followed was loud in its own way. It wasn't calm. It was loaded, like everyone was waiting for a spark to ignite. Karoline's fingers brushed the podium, then relaxed. "I've said my piece. We're moving on." She pointed elsewhere, but before the next question landed, that same voice rang out. "Why is a straight answer so hard?" A tiny crack showed in Karoline's expression, just a flicker, but it was there if you looked close. The cameras panned, soaking it all in. This wasn't just a story now. It was a live-wire moment, and the room knew it. Karoline stood straighter. "I'm not here to drag this out. Got a fresh question? Ask it. If not, others get their shot." The challenger grinned. "Fine, fresh one. Why's this team so afraid of the truth?" A few soft gasps slipped out. Notebooks rustled as pens flew. The pressure was suffocating. Karoline blinked once, slow like she was sizing things up. Her hands settled on the podium, solid as ever. She flashed a smile, not warm, but knowing, like she'd caught the trick. The truth? That's what we're all about. But this is a stunt, not a question. The challenger's grin wavered, just a touch. Another reporter tried. "Karoline, can I?" But that stubborn voice broke in again. "So real issues are just a stunt to you?" The room held its breath. This wasn't about facts anymore. It was a battle for the wheel. Karoline's steady gaze locked in, but the challenger kept poking. How long could this go before something gave? The lenses stayed rolling, and the real twist was still ahead. The briefing room felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium, her calm face a shield against the storm brewing around her. The challenger, the reporter with the smirk and the sharp tongue, wasn't letting up. "You're dismissing real concerns as a stunt," she pressed, her voice dripping with defiance. Every eye was glued to the scene, every pen poised to capture the next move. This wasn't just a question anymore. It was a dare, and the whole place could feel the stakes climbing higher. Karoline took a beat, letting the words hang there. She'd dealt with pushy reporters before, but this one was different. The challenger wasn't digging for answers, she was fishing for a fight. A few journalists shifted in their seats, uneasy. Others leaned forward, hooked on the drama. The cameras hummed, zooming in tight. Karoline's jaw tightened for a split second, just enough to hint she wasn't unbreakable. Then she spoke, voice low but razor-sharp. A free press asks tough questions. It doesn't turn a room into a circus. The challenger chuckled, a dry little sound that bounced off the walls. A circus? I'm just doing my job, something you're dodging. Isn't that what accountability looks like? She tilted her head, pen tapping faster now, like she was daring Karoline to crack. The air got heavier, thick with unspoken bets on who'd blink first. A veteran reporter in the back muttered to his buddy, "This isn't news, it's a reality show." But no one else spoke. They were too busy watching. Karoline didn't bite. She adjusted her stance, hands firm on the podium. Accountability's fine. But this? This is you chasing a spotlight, not the facts. I've answered, let's move on. The challenger shook her head, that grin still plastered on. So just to be crystal clear, she said, pausing for effect, you're dodging because you can't answer, or because you won't? The room sucked in a breath. A few gasps slipped out, quiet but sharp. That was the line, the one that turned a tense exchange into something raw. Karoline's eyes narrowed, just a flicker, but she held steady. I'm not playing this game, she said, her tone cutting through the noise. This isn't about you. It's about the people out there. She nodded toward the cameras, a subtle move that shifted the focus. The challenger's smirk twitched. Right? She shot back, because asking for clarity's a game now. A ripple ran through the crowd. Some journalists scribbled furiously, sensing a headline brewing. Others swapped quick looks, half annoyed, half fascinated. This wasn't how press conferences usually went. It was messy, loud, and way too personal. Karoline exhaled, slow and deliberate, like she was resetting the clock. We're done with this loop, she said. If you've got something worth hearing, stay. If not, I'm moving forward. The challenger laughed again, softer this time, but it carried a sting. Silencing the press. Got it, she muttered, loud enough for the mics to catch. Karoline's face didn't change, but her shoulders squared up. She'd heard the jab coming a mile away. She glanced sideways, not obvious, just a flicker toward the security guard by the door. The room caught it, and the vibe shifted hard. Everyone knew what that look meant. People froze. Notebooks paused mid-scroll. The challenger didn't budge, still leaning forward, pen in hand, that smirk locked in place. She wasn't there to ask, she was there to prove something. Karoline straightened up. One last time, she said, voice like steel. Ask something real, or we're done here. The challenger tilted her head. Real? Like how you're shutting me down for calling it like it is. The guard took a step closer, slow and quiet. The challenger noticed, her eyes flicking to him, but she didn't back off. This is unreal, she said, shaking her head, then louder for the cameras. So much for a free press, huh? Karoline didn't blink. A free press doesn't mean derailing everything for attention, she replied, calm but firm. The guard stopped, waiting, his presence a silent warning. For a heartbeat, it hung there, the challenger weighing her next move, Karoline standing her ground. The room was a live wire, buzzing with what-ifs. Would she push it further? Would security step in? The cameras caught every angle, every twitch. Then the challenger grabbed her notepad, slow and deliberate, slinging her bag over her shoulder. This is a joke, she said under her breath, just loud enough to sting. She turned for the door, tossing one last line over her shoulder. You can kick me out, but the truth doesn't leave that easy. The door clicked shut behind her. The silence afterward was deafening, thick with leftover tension. No one knew where to look, down at their notes, at Karoline, at each other. The cameras didn't stop, still hungry for more. Then a voice piped up from the back. Karoline, was that the right call? She turned, steady as ever. It had to happen, she said simply. Another reporter jumped in. Won't this blow up in your face? She knew it might. She could already picture the headlines spinning wild online. But she didn't flinch. We're here for real talk, not chaos, she said. Who's got a question? A hand crept up, hesitant. The briefing rolled on, but the real fireworks? They were just lighting up outside that room. The second that door slammed behind the challenger, Karoline Leavitt's phone started buzzing like a beehive. She stepped off the podium, her face still a mask of calm, but the briefing room's echo lingered in her ears. Staff scrambled around her, whispering fast, their eyes bouncing between her and their screens. The story was already exploding, clips flying across the internet faster than anyone could blink. Karoline didn't need to check her phone to know what was coming. She'd seen this movie before, and it was about to hit full speed. Down the hallway to her office, one of her aides, a young guy with nervous hands, caught up quick. "It's trending already," he said, scrolling his phone. Hashtag silencing the press is picking up steam. Karoline let out a short breath through her nose, half a laugh, half a sigh. "Of course it is," she said, her voice dry. The aide hesitated, thumb still flicking across the screen. "Big outlets are jumping on it. Some are straight, reporter removed from briefing. Others? Not so much." He didn't have to finish. She could guess the spin. Karoline stopped walking, turning to him. "Let me hear the bad ones," she said. He swallowed, then read off the screen. "Leavitt crushes press freedom. Reporter booted for seeking truth." Karoline smirked, shaking her head. Seeking truth? She was putting on a show. The aide nodded, but his frown stayed. "That's not how they're selling it," he said quietly. She'd known this was coming the moment she'd glanced at security. It was predictable. Snip the clip, strip the context, slap on a juicy headline, and let the internet run wild. Karoline had been around the block enough to expect the chaos, but it still stung a little. She pushed her office door open, the aide trailing behind. "What's our crowd saying?" she asked, settling against her desk. "They've got your back," he said, perking up a bit. "Conservative voices online are calling it a win." Karoline stood tough. She handled a heckler like a pro. "The usual crew's cheering you on." Karoline nodded, arms crossed. "And the White House?" The aide's face tightened. "They're keeping their distance. No slap on the wrist yet, but no high fives either." That silence from the top hung there, heavy for a second. Karoline tilted her head back, staring at the ceiling like it might give her answers. Then she dropped her gaze to the aide. "And her? No need to say who." The aide scrolled again. "She's milking it. Just did a live hit, saying it's a dark day for press freedom. She's booked on every channel tonight." Karoline let out a quiet scoff. "Of course she is." She paced to the window, peering down at the street. Reporters were already clustering outside, cameras aimed up like they could smell the story growing. "She wanted this," Karoline muttered, mostly to herself. "And we handed it right to her." The aide bit his lip, shifting his weight. "So what's our next step?" he asked, voice low. She didn't answer right away. Her mind was racing. Stay quiet and let it burn out, or push back before the narrative stuck like glue. Her jaw clenched as she watched another news van roll up below. The aide cleared his throat. "We could sit tight," but Karoline cut him off, turning sharp. "No. What's our best shot?" He blinked, then nodded fast. "We've got the full video, unedited. Drop that now. Let people see the whole thing. Show how many times you gave her a chance before it went sideways." Karoline tapped her fingers on the desk, thinking it over. It was solid. Let the raw footage do the talking. No spin, just facts. But she knew facts didn't always win the day. Perception did. "Do it," she said finally. "Get it out fast." The aide sprang into action, typing up a quick post. Karoline watched him work, her brain already jumping ahead. The challenger had wanted a stage, she'd gotten one. But Karoline wasn't just reacting. She was laying tracks for what came next. Within an hour, the video hit the web. No fancy cuts, no voiceover, just the plain, unfiltered exchange. The caption was simple. "See it for yourself. Karoline Leavitt and reporter at today's briefing." Views piled up quick, thousands of minutes. Comments flooded in, some angry, some on her side. Her phone pinged with a text from a media friend. "Smart play, this could slow their roll." But Karoline wasn't so sure. The challenger was already out there, spinning her tail on live TV. She clicked on a stream. There was the challenger, sitting in a studio, her face all serious and wronged. "I was just doing my job," she told the anchor, Emily Johnson, a big name on the evening circuit. "I asked fair questions, and they kicked me out." That's chilling for anyone who cares about free speech. Emily nodded, leaning in. "Did it feel personal?" The challenger sighed, all dramatic. "Not personal, no, but it's a hit to journalists everywhere. This isn't how it's supposed to work." Karoline rolled her eyes, locking her phone. The truth was out there now, but would people buy it? Her aide poked his head in. "You've got to see this," he said, waving her over. She followed him to the hall, where staff huddled around a TV. It was a friendly network, playing her full clip. The host paused it, pointing at the screen. "Look at this," she interrupts nonstop. "That's not reporting, that's a tantrum." Karoline crossed her arms, watching the tide start to turn, just a little, but enough to keep her in the fight. The TV in the hallway glowed with Karoline Leavitt's full video clip, the one her team had just dropped online. The host, a gruff guy with a no-nonsense vibe, pointed at the screen, pausing it right where the challenger cut in again. "She's not asking, she's badgering," he said, shaking his head. Karoline didn't squash the press here. She stopped a loudmouth from stealing the show. His panel nodded along, one chiming in. This was a setup. Push hard, get tossed, then cry foul. Classic move. Karoline stood there, arms crossed, watching the words hit the air. It felt good to hear some backup, even if it was just one side of the coin. The room's chatter picked up. Her staff traded quick glances, a mix of relief and worry. The aide next to her leaned in. "This could shift things," he whispered. Karoline gave a small nod, but her eyes stayed on the screen. She knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Out there, the story was a runaway train. Headlines pinged across phones, talk shows lit up, and social media turned into a shouting match. Half the posts painted Karoline as a hero who wouldn't take nonsense. The other half? They cast her as a bully stomping on free speech. Memes popped up fast, some poking fun at the challenger's smirk, others slapping Karoline's face on cartoon villains. It was loud, messy, and nonstop. She stepped back into her office, the noise fading behind the door. Her phone buzzed again, another clip. It was the challenger on Emily Johnson's show, her voice all earnest now. "I was there to hold power accountable," she said, eyes locked on the camera. "Instead, they shut me down. That's not democracy." Emily tilted her head, playing along. "So this felt like a warning to journalists?" The challenger nodded slow. "Exactly. If they can boot me, who's next?" Karoline flicked the screen off, her jaw tight. The spin was in full swing, polished, dramatic, and built to stick. She knew the drill. Facts got buried under feelings every time. But then her aide rushed in, waving his phone. "Check this out," he said, pulling up a different take. It was an old-school reporter, gray hair and all, talking on a late-night panel. "Let's cut the noise," he said, leaning forward. She asked, Karoline answered. She didn't like it, kept poking. "That's not digging for truth. That's hunting for a moment." The host raised an eyebrow. "So Karoline was in the right?" The guy shrugged. "I'm saying we've got to call it straight. Journalism's about facts, not stunts." She ran to the cameras playing victim the second she got the hook. Karoline let out a slow breath, finally. Someone nailed it. But the damage was already rolling. Her aide glanced at her. "This guy's got reach. Might help." She wasn't so sure. The crowd who saw her as the bad guy wouldn't budge. Clips were cut. Minds were made up. Still, it was a crack of light in the storm. Her phone kept buzzing text from allies, updates from staff. The aide hesitated, then spoke up. "You've got an interview slot with Karoline." Cut him off sharp. "No way." He blinked. "But it's a friendly one. Doesn't matter," she said, standing up. "I'm not feeding this beast anymore. The video's out. Let it ride." He nodded slow, backing off. Karoline grabbed her phone, scrolling the flood of alerts. This wasn't dying down. It was growing legs. She looked at the aide. "One last push," she said. "What's that?" he asked, curious. She smirked, just a little. "Put out a statement for words." He waited, pen ready. "Watch the full video," she said. He grinned, typing fast. It was simple, sharp, a nudge to cut through the chaos. The statement hit the web quick, a quiet jab in a loud fight. Karoline leaned back, staring out her window. Down below, the reporters still swarmed, hungry for more. She knew this wasn't just about one rowdy briefing. It was bigger, about how stories got twisted, how truth got drowned out by the roar. The aide peeked in. "It's live, people are biting." She nodded. "I'm still on the street." The dust wouldn't settle yet, but she'd planted her flag, and that was enough for now. Karoline Leavitt stood by her office window, watching the reporters swarm below like ants on a spilled soda. Her final statement, "Watch the full video," was out there, a small spark in a wildfire of noise. The story wouldn't quit. It roared across screens, from cable news to coffee shop chats, splitting people down the middle. Some saw her as a rock, holding the line against a pushy reporter. Others pegged her as a wall blocking the truth. The dust wasn't settling, it was kicking up higher. Her aide slipped in, phone glowing with updates. "It's a split," he said, scrolling fast. "Half the web's cheering you," she owned that heckler. "The other half's mad, press freedom's toast." Karoline nodded, barely moving. She'd expected the divide. Truth was out there, raw and unfiltered, but people picked the version that fit their vibe. Her eyes flicked to the TV still humming in the hall. Emily Johnson's show flashed a poll. Did Karoline go too far? The ticker showed 52% saying no. Close, but not clear. She turned to the aide. What's the challenger up to? He winced. Still talking everywhere. Calling it a wake-up call for journalists. Karoline smirked, sharp and quick. She's riding this wave hard. It was true. The challenger had her moment and wasn't letting go. But Karoline wasn't shaken. She'd played her card, and some were listening. That old-school reporter's words stuck with her. This isn't about facts, it's about the game. He was right, and she knew it. The real fight wasn't that briefing room. It was the mess of screens and sound bites shaping what people believed. Karoline sat back, the buzz fading to a hum. This would pass, like every storm did. But it left a mark, a loud reminder that truth was slippery when clicks ruled the day. She looked at her aide. We did what we could, she said. He nodded. Yeah, now they decide. So, what's your call? Was Karoline a champ standing firm, or did she cross a line? Drop your take in the comments. We're reading every one.